unital C-star algebra contained in the bounded operators of X. So any such any unital C-star algebra A that fits in there, fits in the scheme that represents a compactification. Okay, this is what we said last time. Also what we said last time, that we can choose a particular A. So this is what we call the Gromov compactification of X. And let me kind of remind you what the Gromov compactification was. So to define Gromov compactification, we use this symbol X, Y, B. And this symbol says you're going from X to Y through B, and what is the deficit? What is the error? So you said half go from X to B, and then go from B to Y, and subtract off X to Y. So how much more you have to go if you were going through this base point? This is what this symbol means. Right? And the Gromov compactification uses this in the following sense, that if you have a continuous function, so f is continuous, yeah, and for every epsilon greater than 0, there is a k greater than 0, such that if x, y, b is greater than k, then fx minus fy, the absolute value of that, is less than epsilon. So any continuous function that has this property will automatically be bounded, that's what we checked. It will be an algebra, that's what we checked. It contains this C0 of x. It has nice values at the visual boundary. So this is a nice compactification. This is what we have already done last time, more or less, right? I think you are here, so you are the only person who can say if I did this or not did this last time. And so this time, there was one thing that motivated us to define the whole thing, and that was that this theorem, the Gromov compactification, is invariant. No. So let me not state it like that. Let me state it like that. So if f of phi from x to y, because f is a big function, is large scale equivalence, then it extends to a map on the Gromov compactification. And in fact, it is a homeomorphism when restricted to the boundary. So this is the whole thing. So large scale maps. So this is not at all, this phi is not at all continuous. There is no regularity assumption, no nothing, no intention of making it nice. But what you have from the large scale geometry, its effect on the infinity is nice. It's a homeomorphism, topological regularity we have achieved from nowhere. Okay, and this was the statement, and I wanted to give at least some part of the proof. So Why would this even be true, right? Why would you think this is even true? So first, the heuristic version. So this is only a picture version. This is not the rigorous proof. Okay. So how did we define visual boundary? We defined the visual boundary as a geodesic ray going to infinity up to an equivalence class. So two geodesic rays define the same point at infinity if the distance between them always stays bounded. And so this is what we call asymptotic geodesics. Okay? And we see that the Gromov functions are all well defined. But let's just focus on a large scale map. So this is X, and gamma is a geodesic ray. And now apply phi to it. And I get a different ray, which might even not be continuous. But what do we know from the stability? So this thing is not continuous, but since phi is a large scale map, this phi composed with gamma is a quasi geodesic. And by the stability theorem of quasi geodesic, it's pretty much going to be a geodesic. So it corresponds to a geodesic that's close to it. Let's call this phi composed with gamma is approximated by gamma prime, which is a real geodesic. Okay, so how do we map the point at infinity to the point here? So if we have a point X at the boundary, then you just map it to the point corresponding to gamma prime. Okay, so this is phi of X is the limit of gamma. That's how the heuristic proof of this thing works. Of course, it can be made rigorous. Have you defined all these things using what's called the cone topology and all that, then there will be a lot of different kind of mathematics that will eventually let you say that this statement is true. Okay, but we are going the functional analytic way. So let's just go on with that. So by the way, I will do abstract version of all of this, of our large scale geometry stuff today. Oh, I didn't use enough water. So now we come to the real proof of this thing. The real proof is also very simple. You have to remember that we made a statement last time. And this is where so in this proof I had not said anything about delta hyperbolicity of X or Y or anything like that. But now in the real proof, we need the technicalities. Right? So what we actually need is the following thing, and you will see why this is sufficient. So what we say that for every k greater than 0, there exists an L greater than 0 such that what happens? If my deficit of going from X to Y through B, the Gromov product, if this is bigger than K, then I would like, and this should automatically imply that phi X, phi Y, phi B is greater than that. Right, so this is what I need, essentially. This is the only technical thing we need. I'll do that, and we have already studied some property of the Gromov product on a hyperbolic space. So the Gromov product on a hyperbolic space has the property that there exists delta prime on X such that the minus delta prime is less than distance of the base point to the geodesic xy. Sorry. Yeah. Which way am I writing? Am I writing something? No. Sorry, I sometimes one forgets. Inequalities are funny things. So I want to just say. Sorry, I have what do you call this thing? Memory. I don't even remember the word for memory sometimes.
Sorry?
Yeah?
Are you sure that you want for every k there exists an L, and not for all L there exists a k?
Well, actually, I want both, but this map is a large scale equivalence, as in my assumption.
Okay.
So, if I state it this way for one side, I would get the other way by assuming the large scale equivalence, I think. But let me rethink this a little bit. That's what I want. What I want is the following. So I would be given, so I will change directions. The map is from X to Y, but the corresponding map on the space of functions is always from Y to X. So what I would start here is with a Gromov function on Y and compose it with phi to get a Gromov, to show that you end up getting a Gromov function on X. Right? So whenever there is a map between spaces, the map between the corresponding C-square algebra actually goes in the other direction, which is pretty much the composition by the map in the spaces. So this category, the theorem that we proved last time, the Gelfand-Neumark theorem, so I would state that the Gelfand-Neumark theorem says that you have locally compact Hausdorff spaces and comb C-star algebras. These two categories are same, but this functor is contravariant. It changes the direction of the arrows. That is the important thing. So this is what we need.
The thing I think is this thing here, because it seems to me that L should be small for this to be satisfied.
No, so what we have is that if we have a function on y, then for every epsilon for this function composed with this to be bigger than some bound, you will need that the corresponding L thing is satisfied. So I'll kind of come to that in a bit. So first let's get this done. You might be right. We'll see if I need it the other way around. Let's just go through it and figure out how this should be. Amazingly, I think I had even written it like that, but maybe I didn't think it while I was writing, because I wrote a lot last couple of days. So let's see. So we need to say that actually the distance of the base point to the geodesic xy minus some delta is less than equal to, which does not matter which way you write these two letters, by the way, is less than equal to the distance of the base point So this is what we claim is true for delta hyperbolic spaces, this inequality. What does it say is that this object is within a bounded distance of, so this is within a bounded error from the distance of B to the geodesic, right? This is what we want. X to that. So what we can see is that when I apply phi to this, I get phi x, phi y is a quasi-geodesic. So this thing is a quasi-geodesic. So when I apply phi to this geodesic, I get a quasi-geodesic, which is within a bounded error by our theorem. This quasi-geodesic is within a bounded error from the real geodesic. Phi x, phi y, the real geodesic. Okay? So I'm not keeping track of L and K right now. I will see what L and K I need. So if suppose this is less than some K, this is like K plus minus delta prime. This will be again K plus minus the R in the stability theorem that we had, plus delta prime. Okay, so we are just not saying explicitly. So this would be K plus minus delta prime, this will be K plus minus delta prime and plus minus R from the stability theorem. So there is a bounded error from this geodesic. And also, that means that phi B and the distance of this geodesic, the distance of this thing is within bounded error, is within bounded error of basically this thing, distance of B. So all I'm saying is that, which is within bounded error of. Am I getting confused here? Yes. So far so good. I just said this is within bounded error of this, and now I have to just undo this thing again and say this is within bounded error. Sorry about that. This was more simple than I made it. Error of the distance phi b, distance of this Gromov product. Sorry, phi x, phi b, phi y. So the Gromov product is within bounded distance of this, which is within bounded distance of this, which is within bounded distance of this, which is within bounded distance of this. This is the logic. Maybe I have slightly messed it up, but what you want, if your map was by large scale, by Lipschitz large scale, you could go both ways. You could say one of these is within bounded distance of the other. Right, so for K you can find L within bounded distance of K, for L you can find a K within bounded distance of L. If the map was large scale equivalence. This is this is more or less the deal. And the bounded distance is the delta prime in X, the R in the stability theorem, and the delta prime in Y. If you add these three numbers, that's how far K and L should be apart from each other. Okay. So, is that confusing, Tobias?
No.
But I mean, the idea is clear. My talking is slightly more confusing today. Let's just break it all on lockdown. Right? That's our human psychology is apparently excellent at that. And that's very good, what do you call it? If you can blame things on other people, then you know what profession you should do? What's the best profession for you? If you can always find someone else to blame for everything.
Politics? Politics?
You become a politician. Yeah. It doesn't help us for the magician to do that.
Sorry, we can't hear you.
Somebody's trying to say something?
Somebody tried to say something.
Ah, did you mean?
No, we
Okay.
can't.
We hear you.
Yeah, I just said politics.
I see. Good. Anyway, so how far are we? So let me think which way we need, but the kind of argument we put in, we can go both ways. Because phi is a large scale equivalence, we could have gone both ways in this argument at any time. Okay, so this is important, maybe, but I'm going to just see which way we need actually to work out the statement in the first side. Right, so we have a function f, which is in Cg of y, right? And we want to say that phi composed with f. So f of phi x, right, belongs to Cg of x. So this is given, this is claimed. So then we'll have a map phi star from here to Cg of x. This is what we look for. Okay. So what do we get here when we do this? How can we show that this is in there? So this means that for any epsilon, we have to find a k. So you are right, actually. we need to find k greater than 0 such that if x, y, b is greater than k, then phi x f is f of phi y is less than epsilon. Okay. But we know when this will be less than epsilon. This will be less than epsilon. So this is less than epsilon if the Gromov product phi x, phi y, phi b is greater than L. So this will be less than epsilon if this was greater than L. Right? So of course you were right at the beginning, and I think I should have written this implication the other way for the kind of statement. If this is the case, that this is to be greater than epsilon, then automatically this thing will hold, right? And if this is hold, that means this will be less than epsilon, and that will mean that this guy is in this space. So if I had written the claim the other way around, I would have had that this is true. Okay. So by the way, I'm not showing that there is any continuity in this map as of now. I've not shown that there is any continuity in this map. So what this actually does is that it maps the what do you call it? The spectrum. I think we didn't talk about it, but it's written in the notes in great details how the Gelfand theorem works. How the compactification of this should be mapped on this. There is a correspondingly a map from the Gromov compactification to the Gromov compactification, which need not be continuous. So if we prove this, then we have that there is a phi extends to the spectrum of CGX. So this is not necessarily continuous so far. But what is actually, I don't want to do function analysis so much. But if you believe in this much, the function analysis is very, very straightforward. Function analysis is rather amazingly straightforward. That one needs to know some more vocabulary for that. It's nothing very deep. Maybe I will write this more carefully in the notes. I have already written it, but I'll write it more carefully and more long. So if you can read these notes, anyways. So the functional analysis tells you that if you have this thing, what you have is that you can consider the map phi star now from not from this to that, but CGY mod C0x, C0y. So this is always an ideal in here, we check that, right? To CGX mod C0x. And this thing represents this is again a continuous C-star algebra, and this is the continuous C-star algebra corresponding to the boundary of Y. And this is the continuous C-star algebra corresponding to the boundary of X. Okay? But our claim here can be very easily modified to check that this map is in fact continuous. Is an algebra map. The map of algebras. But something funny and true about C-star algebras. So these are Banach spaces. These are Banach spaces, and you would like that this map between these C-star algebras is continuous. So maybe I should continue with this. But the continuity is automatic. So whenever there is an algebra map between C-star algebra, it is always continuous. It is always continuous on the C-star. So algebraic property implies topological property. So this is something well known, and I didn't want to spend any time on this, but just checking this provides us the fundamental fact that our map will end up being a homomorphism on the boundary. Okay? So far so good. Okay. It's hard for me to know if you guys have any questions. That is the because now I want to say change the whole landscape of what we are doing. Oh, before I do that, let me recap and mention what we have learned so far. And what are the implications of learning these things? There is a lot to say actually. I keep forgetting to say so many things every time. Okay, so what do we have said so far? That if we have a large scale map from X to Y, large scale equivalence, it restricts to a map from delta X to delta Y is a homomorphism. Okay. So let me just rewind this for a second for you, Tobias. So what we said is that a map like this, you can check the proof last time when we checked that a Gromov function that vanishes at all geodesic is in C0x. If you apply that proof, you can check that this is an algebra map between these two C-star algebras. So these are Banach spaces, but this is just an algebraic map. But in C-star algebras, there is a special property. If you have algebraic map, then they are continuous on the C-star algebras, on unit to C-star algebras. So that means that this is a map on C-star algebras, and therefore, correspondingly, whenever there is a map between C-star algebras, commutative C-star algebra, there is a map from delta x to delta y, which is continuous. So starting with this phi star, we get phi extends to the boundary continuously. So this was the short explanation of that. But this is just saying this is what the Gelfand-Norman theorem tells you. No magic, no really difficult stuff. So now I'm trying to recap. So we started with a large scale map and we got a homomorphism at infinity. Right? Let's just consider an example before I venture into the more abstract setup. And this example is really instructive for going to the world of abstract large scale structure. Right, so we start with the hyperbolic two plane. So this is x. What is the boundary of x? The boundary we defined as geodesics going to the same point, equivalence classes. So it's not very hard to see that the boundary of x, a boundary of, so if I had taken Hn, so this would be, well, I'll just add S1, doesn't matter. But you could always replace this with Hn and Sn minus 1. Okay, so this is the boundary. To see that this is the boundary, it's also important that if I start with any large scale map, phi from x to x is large scale. Okay. Then something more happens. You get a map, a homomorphism, the extension to the boundary, a homomorphism. But there is something more than, it is actually even better than a homomorphism in this example and in most of these examples. It's in fact better than a homomorphism in the sense that this large scale geometry gives us a metric on the boundary. So the large scale geometry gives a metric on the boundary. How? That you can pick any point P, and if I take 2 points x and y, and I can look at the geodesic from P to x and the geodesic from P to y. At this space, in this tangent space, there is an angle between these two geodesics. Right? And you define the distance xy to be the angle at P, gamma x, gamma y. Right? So x and y are in the boundary. And what this large scale map does is actually, it is what's called quasi-conformal with respect to this metric. So it's just not any homomorphism of the circle, it's a quasi-conformal homomorphism of the circle. And in fact, you could replace this discussion with x equals hn, then delta x is Sn minus 1, and large scale maps of hn give quasi conformal maps on Sn minus 1. So this is something I will talk about again later, but this is just a glimpse of how compactification influences the large scale geometry and how large scale geometry influences compactification. So although we are not assuming that this map from the hyperbolic space to hyperbolic space is continuous, its restriction to the circle is not just continuous, it's quasi-conformal. Right? So you get quite some regularity out of this kind of construction. So I think many of you are interested in low regularity geometry, right? If I understand this. So there are such ideas as well, classical ideas, to handle low regularity. Okay, so with that, we have not in the most complete way, at least provided some invariants to large scale metric spaces and some other properties. So what's wrong? It's not doing it. Okay, so before, I think I'm going to just go on to the next thing, which is, and we'll see how things work out, because I don't want to give a whole lot of motivation all the time. But now, we have seen enough examples of metric large-scale geometry. Especially, very explicitly, hyperbolic metrics and hyperbolic graphs, right? So this is something we kind of understand. And being mathematicians, our first task is what? What do we do when we have a theorem? We generalize. So let's look at abstract large-scale structures. Of course, structures like that. So on a metric space, what did we need to define our large-scale geometry? We said that we had, so on metric space, we started with scales. So X, we start with scales. This is what we started with. And what we said that for large scale maps, one of the requirement is that the scales get mapped inside some other scales. That was one of the requirements for large scale maps. Okay? But this is actually just saying, another way to think about this whole thing is saying that we say that these are the sets that define closeness in X. So this says they define closeness in X. And what a large scale map, so phi is large scale, okay, then one of the things it should do that it should map close sets to themselves, to close sets. Things that are close together should be mapped to close together. So that the infinity, which is the thing at far away, goes to something far away. Right? That's the large scale. Right? So what you do, so this is pretty much what you would do. So coarse structure on a set X on a set X is a collection E of subsets X cross X. Okay, and this collection should of course mimic the scales. That is all you want. You want to mimic the features of the scale in this thing. So one thing that you want is that the diagonal is the set. The diagonal belongs to you. That's one thing you want, right? What else do you want? The scales have some sort of a triangle law property and so on, right? You have to encode not just the scales, you have to encode your property of abstractly encode the triangular inequality. How can we abstractly encode triangular inequality? Right? We have been using it, we have been needing it all the while. And if you want to say, okay, just replace this thing by that thing, how can you replace that? So I take 2 points, x, y, and I said distance xy is less than r, and distance yz is less than s, right? So this belongs to some scale, and this belongs to some scale. Then what is always true? The scale r and scale s. I can compose these things. So you remember I told you that there is a composition on the pairs, the pair group point composition. This is the composition of pair group point. So what do we want to say is that SR composed with S, whenever you can compose these two things together, should be contained in some S, I don't know, it doesn't have to be R plus S in abstract world, because in the mapping thing you don't care how big it becomes, but it should be small. So S, L. This is how you want to encode the triangle inequality. So now that we are going to abstractly think about coarse geometry, what we want to replace the scales by some collections of subsets. You want the diagonal to be in your collection. That's one thing for sure. Second thing you want, well, we want a few other things that I will probably not explain. Second thing is you want is if suppose E is in, well, then any subset is in subset of E is in, and we'll talk about it in a second. Right. But the thing that we checked for triangle inequality, if E and F belong to our collection, this implies that E composed with F belongs to the collection. We should consider this as a small object. And our scales were very nice, they were symmetric. If you change X and Y, it did not matter. So the other thing is, if E is in E, then E inverse is also. And last but not the least, this is the only property E union F belong to, whenever E and F belong to. So some
Sorry, can you read the first one for me?
this one,
No, the fourth one.
fourth one.
Yes.
So if E is a collection of subsets, the controlled sets they are called, not scales.
Yeah.
I should have given them the name. So if E is a controlled set, E inverse is a controlled set. When E inverse,
Okay, E inverse. Okay.
yeah. So if XY, so if this is E, belong to E, implies YX belongs to E inverse. So this is pretty much the definition, if an object. Okay, so this is, as I should have said, this collection of sets, they are called controlled sets. These are the sets that are nice. They are not running away to infinity. They don't have big objects in them. Okay? So this collection of subsets is called controlled sets. Collection E of subsets of this called controlled sets. Such that these properties hold. So we have abstracted at a very minimal level, the property of scales and triangle inequality. Right? But interestingly enough, we will manage to abstract lot of properties that you associate only with matrix spaces. So before I go on doing that, do we want to see examples? So one example we know. Well, where does such a collection E come from? One will come from a
This SR things in the matrix space.
well, SR are a little too restrictive because I have said all subsets.
Subsets of SR.
Yes, so all subsets should be included. So basically, there is a neat way of saying this. So let's now do examples. The examples we already have worked enough with to get our experience. So if XD is a metric space and E belongs to E if supremum XY belong to E dXY is finite. Right, so this is an obvious way of handling, because when you look at images of our scales under large scale maps, the images of the scales under large scale maps were sets like E. They were not usually scales. We didn't say that scales should be equal to scales. They should be contained in scales. Right? So this is what we need. So this is example 0. This is what we studied, and this is where we got all our intuition that we'll use.
So is this like the,
obvious example? Oh, somebody said something.
is this the coarse structure generated by the scales?
Sorry, what?
Would you say this is the coarse structure generated by scales?
Exactly, you can say that. And I was going to talk about generation of coarse structures, but it is the coarse structure generated by the scales. Right? There is an obvious definition of what, like topology generated by some open sets. You said claim some things are open, then the minimal topology that has these guys as open sets is the topology generated by the set. Right? Similarly, this is the same here. It's the coarse structure generated by scales. So the first, again, pretty trivial but useful example, and useful only in proving the statement like generation, is there is a very trivial example, right? E equals right? So whenever you want to say, so I will just do this as the next example. Coarse structure generated by a family of sets as. So what is the coarse structure generated by family? Is the intersection of all the coarse structures that has these sets, and there is at least one, which is this guy. So there is something that's called the minimum. There will be something in the intersection. Okay, so this is kind of the only kind of arguments where you essentially use this coarse structure. Okay, what else can you think about?
Subsets of the diagonal. The other extreme.
Subsets of the diagonal. That's another extreme for sure. Yeah. As long as you have to be a little bit careful. Well, you don't have to be careful at all. I was worried about the inverse in composition, but
No.
if you're on the diagonal, you stay on the diagonal. Okay, so subsets of the diagonal, that's a good example. Unfortunately, I don't know any use of it. I mean, this I can say in very many examples, you start with saying, oh, at least you have that. So you can argue for it. Subsets of diagonal is the other extreme example. Any other? So far we haven't connected this coarse structure to a topological structure, for example. Right? So one basic thing is if you put a topological structure, then you can say, so suppose if X is locally compact Hausdorff and paracompact. So this I will often say because I think otherwise every now and then there will be something wrong. And you will say, if you start with whatever Alexandrov sphere or something, then blah blah happens. I don't want to think about that. Okay, so X is a locally compact Hausdorff. Then E is all proper subsets of X plus X. What's a proper subset of X plus X? That means both the projections phi 1 E and phi 2 E. So pi 1 pi 2 restricted to E are compact are proper maps. So pi 1 pi 2 from E to X are proper maps. So inverse image of compact sets under either of these projections is a compact set. So if such a given all such E's, this will be this is considered an extreme. It's called the indiscrete. So this guy is called the discrete coarse structure. And this thing is called indiscrete coarse structure. Alright. So these are some examples. But before mimicking the whole metric thing that we learned from large scale geometry of metric spaces, we have to at least define one more concept. Right? So now, too many electronic devices make too many sounds. I have to say, I feel somehow this lockdown has had an adverse effect on me today. I'm not in my best of elements. That's okay. So let's see what we need in the metric example. So when we said we have a large scale map, is a large scale map. So one thing would be that control sets in X cross X are mapped to control sets in Y cross Y. That is one piece that we needed in defining large scale maps. There was another thing that we needed. What do we need? Another property. You remember? You're the only person we introduced. So when we said large scale maps, we said that the scales, which now will be replaced by the control sets, were mapped to control sets, right? What else should happen? Large scale map. The inverse image. Huh?
Inverse image
Of bounded sets, symmetrically bounded sets, things which are at a fixed distance. Bounded sets are bounded. But what is bounded when I just define a coarse structure? So this is one question. The question is, what is bounded? In an abstract coarse structure. So this will be the definition of de facto as soon as you define bounded. As soon as you define bounded, you have defined the large scale map, a coarse map. Okay? And second thing is when we said large scale equivalence, so definition phi x to y is a large scale equivalence, coarse equivalence. If phi is a large scale map and there exists psi from y to x, also large scale map such that phi composed with psi is close to identity of y and psi composed with phi is close to identity on x. So there is a concept of close to. Closeness of maps is what we also need. So if we knew these two terms in our abstract setup, we could just verbatim copy paste these definitions and we have our category of coarse spaces. Now what would be a bounded set and what does it mean that two maps are close to each other?
Bounded sets, I would say there is a y such that the set cross the singleton y is controlled.
Huh? Pretty much that, but will do. And for closeness, I thought the closeness is more easy to think about. So
I missed something in the definition.
yeah, so maybe I'll just remind you. Don't worry.
No, I missed singletons to be controlled. So pairs of the form XY.
No. So singleton is not the problem, right? So what you're saying is, I will do your definition first. So definition: B subset of X is bounded if B cross a singleton contained in X cross X is controlled. Right, so this is now a subset. I don't care whether this is controlled, but this subset of X cross X is controlled. Right? This is what your definition is. So after I give you the definition of closeness, I will reformulate this definition. Okay. And then reformulate it one more time, because these equivalent formulations are often very useful. The definition of closeness is actually the same as you had in metric space. So if X is a coarse space, and S is any set, then F prime from S to X are closed if Fs F prime S and S is controlled. So this is pretty much what we said for being closed. We said things are closed because the distance is uniformly bounded in the metric between these 2 points, which is the same thing. So this is definition of controlled closeness. And if you look at this definition, and if you want to say this is a controlled set, right? So when I consider a map from B to S as an inclusion, and I can consider a map from B to X as a constant P. The reformulation of your definition, so this is equivalently the inclusion B into X is close to the constant map. B goes to a point X. This is an equivalent formulation. And yet another equivalent formulation. And this is often what people use most often, so that is why I'm giving it. B cross B is a controlled set.
Nice, I was just about to ask that.
Sorry?
Very nice, I was just about to ask that.
Yeah, but why is that? Is that obvious? This equivalence? So this is, I want to remind you of all the abstract properties, right? So these are exercises in handling the abstract properties. Otherwise, I would just brush this away. So your definition is that this thing is a controlled set, right? What's the inverse of this set? P cross B. So in the first definition, we have B cross P is controlled set. And of course, by the properties of our core structure, this also means that P cross B is controlled set. Right? But now if I compose these two sets, what do I get? By composing them, if you compose these two, you get that. So composing should also be a controlled set. So if you had started here, you end up saying that B cross B is a controlled set. Now take any P in B, and you have, if this was a controlled set, then that is correct. All right. So that's basically how one thinks abstractly, right? B wise, generalize.
But we don't get that B is bounded if and only if B cross any singleton is controlled.
No, but any two singletons are close to each other.
Why?
Huh? That's not true. That's not true. So,
That's why I don't like my example.
Huh?
That's why I don't like my example.
Yeah. So actually, there is one more thing I thought I would get away without talking about it, but I had thought about explicitly talking about it because it's important for the compactification examples I'm going to do. And I thought, it's just too much time spent on. One can never be too clever in mathematics. If you avoid something, it shows up. So generally the definition is this, and this is same as this almost in any example you will work with. Okay? And the thing you need is the obvious addition, and it has a name. So whenever there is a name, we mathematicians tend to overdo and call it a definition. Right? So coarse space X is connected if any PQ singleton in X plus X is controlled. Okay? And if you think about this in terms of metric spaces, this will not be topologically true usually, by the way. When you have topological compatibility, there will be issues. But in our metric space definition, you could have a metric space with many connected components. And when you have many connected components, what do you define the distance between x, y, between different components? To be infinity. So that would mean that x, y will not be in any scale. Mm-hmm. So if you have in our definition of geodesic space and so on, we have been saying we need a connected metric space. And this is really an equivalent thing as far as metric spaces are concerned. So if two things are not in the same connected component in a metric space, they will also be not in the same connected component in the metric space. Okay? But topologically, this word connected can mean something different. Okay? There could be topologically different issues. So now I have erased the definition of the large scale map and the large scale equivalence, but we know what that should mean. We know what bounded means. Inverse image of bounded should be bounded. Right? So if we have this definition that the space is connected, so if X is connected, then these are all equivalent. Otherwise, take this to be the definition. But we'll almost always work with connected spaces. So not to worry. In almost all the cases, this will be equivalent. Now it's better? Now you're happy?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this is, of course, what we don't want also in metric space situation. We don't want disconnected spaces. Creates a problem. Right? All right. So far, so good. So we have abstracted all of this structure, and I wanted to actually include. Do you want a little bit more of abstract nonsense? Just one more bit? Just one more bit of abstract nonsense before we go to something creative and see, the abstract nonsense has the feeling that somebody was sweating and was in a lockdown and had nothing better to do in the lockdown, so they kept up making definitions. That's what abstract nonsense sounds like. So another definition, a lockdown definition. So if X is paracompact and locally compact Hausdorff space, so now I have topology on X, right? A Coarse space structure on X is called proper, and this name is going to be inspired from the metric space. Do you remember that we defined certain metric spaces are proper metric spaces? When are they proper? When the distance matters and D is proper. So this word should remind you always of that in this context. So a Coarse structure is proper if there are two conditions. One, there exists controlled neighborhood of the diagonal. So we said that the diagonal is a controlled set, but we never said any neighborhood, we were talking when X was just a set. Now X is a topological space, then diagonal has also neighborhoods. And we want at least one neighborhood to be a controlled set. That is one requirement, right? And that is a very logical requirement. I mean, come on. Right? And the second requirement is, now we defined smallness or boundedness using the Coarse structure. But what's small in paracompact locally Hausdorff space? What do you think is small when you think about a locally compact space? How do you define infinity or one-point compact definition? Outside a compact set. So it says that every bounded subset. Right, so we just subset, that is B cross B is controlled. Every bounded subset B is relatively compact. See, we are supposed to allow subsets here. So we cannot say just compacts, right? But we can say relatively compact. So this way the topology and the large scale structure get combined together. And so actually I didn't think about it very much, but maybe we can see if I can handle this on the spot. A theorem should be, or a proposition should be, so if XD is a metric space, the large scale structure of XD is proper as defined by the subsets that are have a bounded distance function on them. If and only if D is proper. So when I did this equivalence, I should have applied this equivalence of the boundedness to the example of metric spaces. and should have shown that this definition makes sense. Right? So for the metric thing, something is bounded if the metric is bounded. Okay? That should have been a requirement in testing this definition, but we did not test our definition. So what should have already been tested is the following, which I will not test. So this will be for someone to do their homework. A test of this definition would have been, actually because I forgot to use the word connected and we had a different conversation after that. I forgot that there is a test here. And the test is B is bounded as a subset of XD if and only if B is bounded as in the coarse structure associated to X. So this is something that should have been a test of our definition, right?
Hmm?
But I think I'm going to leave it. It's not terribly difficult. One has to think a little bit, and you should see if I've forgotten to say something about it. So here, if you have a metric space, then of course the diagonal has open control. So by definition, the scales are open neighborhoods of diagonals. The first condition is met. And second thing is that if I look at the bounded set with respect to the coarse structure, if I look at the bounded set in the coarse structure, it's the same as the bounded set as the metric structure, and D is proper would mean only if this bounded set is, if and only if the bounded set is relatively compact. So these two things are one and same. So this definition is an abstractification of that definition. Okay. So, I don't know if is that a valid word? Abstractification. Yeah. I like it. At least from you. You should come up with our own terminology, right? So now to the serious business. Slowly to the serious business. I'm not going to do too much abstract stuff. I think if you really feel inclined towards the abstract life of course geometry, the real applications really come when you introduce cohomology or C-star algebras. Right? And that I'm not going to do. So, but there is one particular situation or example which is of absolute interest without going to C-star algebras or going to any cohomology case. So that is the only thing that I will talk about. I mean, maybe my knowledge is limited. There are other things that we can do without going into C-star algebras, but this is my only main thing. So, what did we start this lecture with? It started with compactification. So what we saw is that when we have a metric space, at least a hyperbolic metric space, the large scale geometry associates to it a natural compactification. So we started with the large scale geometry of metric space, and we got a hyperbolic metric space, and we got compactification. So now I want to do the other way around. So I want to say that, of course, this is, if you introduce compactification, if you introduce infinite to your space, then you should have a large scale structure to your space. So the thing is that any compactification of, I will say paracompact always, but some people won't, because I just don't want to deal with the infinite amount of topological nonsense, if you believe that word. Any compactification of a paracompact, locally compact housed up space gives large scale jump. So this is the crux. So if you forget everything a few years later and you remember this one line, you might just say, oh yeah, I have a compactification, I must have a large scale structure, and then you can look it up. Right? So sometimes it's good to have a, how much time we have? Already past our time.
-2.
Oh, really? Man, I've been really, what you call it? Locked down in my brain. I thought this would be easy peasy to finish this. Okay, so the statements of what this is involved is there. I will next time not just include the statement, also include the proof. And that is done all for today. Good. So we have at least done the politicians' work, put up the slogan. Right. By the way, I do want to say, if you ever get, I think the hyperbolic kind of things and this regularity thing that you see, strangely, nobody has tried to do anything in other low regularity studies. There has to be an analysis, and I don't know how to do it. I thought about it a little bit more, but it's not that trivial. But, you guys are young and strong, so something for you guys to do. All right, do we ask them for any comments if they have any?
No, I just have Felix has to go now.
Huh?
Felix has to go now, and knock.
That's it. Okay, good. All right. Good. So we can then follow.
Yeah, we can stop the recording. I didn't forget.